Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is Camping with Shane. In the previous video, we went over choosing the right van for your DIY van build, and now it's time for the fun part, planning the build. Whether you're in a minivan, you're in a mid-size cargo van, or a full-size Sprinter, getting your layout right is everything. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how to figure out what you really need in your van build and some things to think about before you get building. All right, so let's get started. So before you start building, you're going to want to figure out everything that you're going to want to have in your van. First off, you're going to want a comfortable place to sleep every night, rather than if that's a fixed bed or a bed that turns into a couch. For our smaller vans, a bed that turns into a couch can be a great option. If it's just you, you don't have to worry about having a big bed. If it's you and a partner, especially in a minivan, that's going to take up a lot of your space in the van if you have a more full-sized bed. And then you got to think about, your cooking setup, how often you're going to be cooking meals inside your van, if you're going to be eating out a lot. If you're cooking a lot in the van, you're going to want proper ventilation system. And you're going to want a nice little dedicated space to cook. That's kind of hard to do when you're in a minivan, but once you get to the mid-sized cargo vans and the full-sized van, you can really build yourself a nice kitchen. And then you got to think about storage, because you're going to have a lot more stuff than you think when you're living in a van or when you're on camping trips. You're going to want to think about everything you're going to be bringing, where you're going to be putting things. I know when my previous van build, I really didn't have a lot of storage, so under my bed I just had stuff piled everywhere. And then you're going to want to think about your power system. Are you going to go with a little portable power bank? Are you not using too much power? Are you going to want to put a full-on DIY system in there with like solar panels, full battery bank, inverter and stuff? That's something you really want to think about before you start building your van, because you're going to want to think about where you're going to run that electricity, where you need power, and everything along those lines. And plumbing too, if you're going to be putting in like a sink or like a outdoor shower or even a full bathroom, you're going to want to plan that out, where you're going to run your water, how much water you're going to have, gray tank, where you're going to put your fresh tank, where you're going to put your gray tank. And then also, if you're going to put a toilet in there, composting toilets are super nice. They make some pretty small ones that you can pretty much fit anywhere, have like a nice pull-out drawer. And then also, you're going to want to think about where you're going to be, hanging out, like a nice lounging area. Because if you're living in your van full time, there's definitely going to be days where you're going to be chilling out in the van. And you're going to want a nice, comfortable space to sit down, eat your food, have a little workstation. So that's something to think about when you're building your van. And then just anything else, like if you're going to be bringing bikes, surfboards, skateboards, you're going to want to think about where you're going to be storing those things. Bikes, you can usually put them on a bike rack on the back, but then you risk, that getting them stolen. So you want to make sure they're locked up really good and like put a tarp over them so they're not exposed to the elements. There's, stuff like that you're going to want to think about. And trash, you're going to want to have a nice trash can. I've noticed, with a full-size trash can, if you have a full-size bag, it can be harder to dispose of those rather than just using like a regular grocery-sized bag to put trash in. So that's one thing you're going to want to think about. So once you've figured out everything that you're going to want to have in your van build, the next step is to measure everything out, drawing it out on paper. So every van is going to be different, but I'm just going to use my van as an example. So I know the cargo space is about 145 inches long, and then it is about 76 inches wide, and then 76 inches tall. So we can start super basic, just a nice rectangle with 145 inches, 76 inches, and 76 inches tall. And every van is going to have, different things inside, like the wheel wells might have some like poles that are sticking out. It's not going to make too big of a difference when you're drawing it out, because right now we're just figuring out how we're going to want to set up our van. Once you start getting in there and start to build, that's when you're going to be taking those little pieces into consideration on how you're going to want to approach them. So once you get your rectangle drawn out, you can kind of start to figure out what your layout's going to be like. This one is not going to be like perfectly to scale. but since I have a bigger van, I know roughly about how much space everything's going to take up. So I'm just going to do some small drawing. I already kind of messed it up, but it doesn't matter too much. We're just kind of getting a basic layout down. So now I just drew some lines. I know I want to have the bed back here, and then have a little couch right there, and then like a nice kitchen area here, and a nice kitchen area there. So that's a good way just to start playing with designs if you're better at drawing, you know, and you can do it kind of 3D. I do that a little bit 3D, but I'm not too good at drawing 3D. That's why I like to use SketchUp, which we're going to hop into later on in the video. So yeah, once you get your measurements all measured out, figuring out what kind of space you're working with, kind of figuring out a layout that you're going to want, this is when we really start to think about where everything's going to be in our build. So you want to think about, if you're putting a little kitchen system, you're going to want to think about the water storage. You know, if you're going to have a little gray tank, a little freshwater tank, you know, where you're going to be putting those things. You know, if you're going to have a battery system, you're going to want to think where you're going to put the batteries. I know in this design right here, I know I have a ton of space under the bed that I can house like my whole battery bank and battery area, power area. And then I can either put a bigger water tank under there too, or I could just go with like a 5-gallon freshwater, 5-gallon gray water just right under the sink itself. So those are just some things you want to think about. Those are some main items right there, you know, plumbing and power, because you're gonna want to run everything power and plumbing wise before you start to build. This is where you're gonna want to think about, are you gonna want to have a fixed bed or a bed that turns into a couch, you know? You're gonna want to think about, you know, storage, you know, where you're gonna be putting things like your clothes, your food, your, you know, pots and pans, just everything. You're gonna want to make a list of all the things you're gonna need in the van, and then start to think about where they're going to go. All right, now we can go into SketchUp. This is a free software where you can do some 3D designs. It's super nice for when you're designing your van and planning it out, because you can get a good visual of what it's going to look like when it's done before actually cutting wood and screwing things together. So we'll start off with a minivan layout. So I just got some rough dimensions online after doing some research of what the cargo space would be like in the average minivan. So you're not working with a ton of space when you have a minivan. You can get creative, but I just made this basic design. It's pretty tight in here. It might look pretty roomy on the 3D model, but it's going to be pretty tight once you actually get into the van. So I'm basing this off of the layout that I would use when I camped in my minivan. So what you can do is, you know, you can have a bed. Your bed is going to take up a lot of space. It's going to be about half of the minivan. And then on the other side, you give yourself a little bit of room. So put like a couple of storage drawers, maybe a little bit of shelving up top. You can have a TV mounted on the side. So this gives you a good visual of what it will look like. And if you like the design, we got some storage drawers there. And then with this build, you know, you got a ton of storage underneath the bed to house your battery system, or just throw whatever you need, your gear. You can make a little storage box right here. So this is just a pretty simple layout that if I had a minivan, I would probably have something along this line, just like it is right here. So let's move on to our more mid-sized vans. So this is when you can really start to play with some concepts. And this is when you can really start to have a lot of things in your van. So as you notice, we got the bed sideways. This is the size of a twin-sized mattress. Here you can see when it's sideways, it opens up all this space over here. You could put yourself a little couch. You can have a little kitchen area. Now keep in mind, this is only about 4 feet tall. So you're not going to be standing up unless you have a pop top. And then you're going to want to build everything a lot higher if you do have that pop top. But this is if you have a mid-sized van without the extended roof. You can still build yourself a nice little kitchen area. Small sinks, small burners, and you'll have some drawers here. You could have your TV on the wall over here. You could have some small shelving units. And then, you know, just some more storage right here. So it is going to be pretty cramped, though. It looks big in the SketchUp, but once you actually build it out in your van, it's gonna feel a lot different. But like I said, this is just a good way to start visualizing what you want your build to be like. So now let's take it over to my big van that I've been planning. This is the layout that I think I'm going to go with. So, you know, you walk in, the door is going to be right here, and then I got a cook stove over here. So this will be like the little cooking area. And then, you know, some storage above. And then over here we got the sink area. So I got a nice sink here with a pop-up table, plenty of storage for all my kitchenware, you know, big storage underneath for water tanks or whatever, plumbing. And then I also give myself a nice little dresser on the side here with a TV mounted, and then more storage up here. And then I also got a nice little couch, so I want to put a nice little couch and have a fixed bed in my unit. So I have my bed right here, nice little couch, TV on the wall, have like some sort of table that I can pull out to have to use. So this is one of the designs that I'm really thinking about going with, but here's another one with a full shower, and then I was thinking of putting like a toilet in here. So with the bigger van, you can put like a nice shower unit, nice bathroom, but you do lose a lot of space, as you can tell. Kind of compromise, a little bit smaller of a chair, way smaller kitchen area here, but a decent amount of storage right here the way I have this one set up. And then just move on the line. This one is kind of the similar setup, but a little bit smaller of a shower area and a bigger bench, and then a kitchen area. I actually do like this setup quite a bit, because you still get a nice kitchen area. You get a TV on the wall, you get your bed, you get a couch, plenty of storage up top, and you still get all that storage underneath the bed as well. And then with this design, I have it so you can pass through the shower to get to like the cab area. So this will be the cab area, pass through. And then it's also nice to have this shower here because it's kind of like a wet area. So like if you're at the beach, you got like a wet suit, you got, you know, wet swim trunks and stuff. You can dry them off, hang them in the shower area. So this is a nice design, but you do lose a lot of space. And then this design, I was kind of playing with it, but I don't like it, so we're just gonna skip that. And then this is another design right here for the bigger van, to where you can have a nice garage slash bathroom. So you can have a full bathroom back here, toilet on one side, shower on the other, and still use it for space to store things. And then, you know, you got a nice dinette that converts into a bed, and then a nice little kitchen area. So I do like this setup. This is a nice setup right here if you're looking to live full time and just have everything, you know, full shower, full bathroom, and everything. So what we have to think about when we're designing our van, you know, whether it's the minivan, the mid-sized, or the full-size, is like we've been talking about. You're going to want to think about where your electronics are going to go. If you're going to be running power, you know, you got plenty of room under here to store batteries, electric system. Same with this bed. You know, pretty much all these designs, you know, you got space under the bed, you can even put it like in the cabinets, under the couch. You can put your electrical system, and then plumbing. If you're going to have a sink, you know, you can go old school or super simple by just having 2 5-gallon jugs underneath your sink, or you could run a full plumbing system with a bigger tank underneath the bed. For my van build, I'm still debating whether to put a 5-gallon fresh water or do like a more water, like a 20-gallon under the bed, and then run it and then have it, because I want to have an outdoor shower and everything. So I'm probably going to end up using a bigger water tank. And then for cooking, I'm thinking about doing an induction stove, so I don't have to worry about, you know, like propane and like the gases, and it just makes it a little easier. You don't have to ventilate too much when you're cooking. You don't have to worry about those that propane or anything. But yeah, I hope this video is helping you on your journey to van life. We just went over, a couple things to think about when you're planning out your build, and a couple ways to plan out the build. SketchUp is a really good way to design your van build. It takes a little bit of time to get used to using it, but once you get used to using it, it is pretty easy, and then it's super fun because you can just build whatever. Alright, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a like, comment down below what you think, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be making a bunch more beginner videos aimed at, beginner van lifers who are just starting out. And yeah, so we'll see you in the next video. Peace.